So, ladies and gentlemen, if you ever wondered what conquered Britain would look like, well, look no further. In fact, have a watch. Now, Britain is facing a rapid and visual collapse in public order, specifically because of the pro-Palestinian mobs. Antisemitism is no longer hidden in Britain. It's open, aggressive, and in many instances tolerated. Now, extremist rhetoric has been chanted in public spaces, police stand by and pretty much do nothing. All this whilst the government sends mixed signals, dangerous signals if you will, to the public. And this isn't really free speech because, as we've seen in Britain, free speech isn't actually that important to the British establishment anymore. It's institutional failure. And all of this is important to you because Britain appears to be the #1 location for South Africans wishing to immigrate. Why you would go from the pot into the frying pan, I'll never know. Many individuals will look at this and say, well, why is anti-Semitism such a big issue? Well, that's because the Jews typically tend to hold on to their culture because for 2,000 years, cultural erasure has been the attempt on the Jews, well, pretty much in every society they've been to. Now, in the West, they don't really tend to do that. So if you want to erase a culture and replace it with a new one, the best way to do that is, well, get rid of the Jews first and then turn on the local cultures. So as Hamas says in its own charters, first we come for the Saturday people, the Jews, and then we come for the Sunday people, the Christian. So you really should pay a lot of attention to this video. But before we go any further, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help. And if you'd like to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. So let's start looking at what's going on in Blighty. Well, pro-Palestinian mobs have been chanting globalize the Intifada and death to the IDF. Now, these aren't peaceful slogans. Globalize the Intifada typically tends to mean globalizing terrorism. And we've actually seen that very recently in, well, Australia. And I've done numerous videos on that. Now, in many instances, what you can actually see is there is police presence at these protests, if you want to call them that. But police do not intervene, they do not arrest, and they do not disperse. And this is typically sending a very clear message, and that is that extremists may act with impunity. They will not be held to any standard in Britain. Now, we're starting to see what this actually looks like in Britain because we're starting to see anti-Semitic graffiti discovered near synagogues. These were reported to the police, the cases were closed the same day, no arrests, no follow-ups, and no reassurance to the Jewish community, which reinforces the perception that Jewish safety is not a priority. Now, contrast this to the approach given to mosques. I mean, we've recently saw during the Christmas period, yet again, another Christian preacher arrested in London for giving sermons because, and I quote, it may upset Muslims. All this whilst there are numerous videos circulating on social media of Muslims going house to house in various areas attempting to convert people at the doorsteps. Apparently it doesn't matter if you upset the locals as long as you don't upset the Muslims. Now, pro-Palestinian extremists have also gone on to vandalize the Queen Mary University in London. yet again, anti-Semitic graffiti sprayed on university buildings. Now, universities are increasingly becoming safe spaces for extremists and fast becoming hostile environments for Jewish students, and silence at these universities all the way up the leadership chain appears to be the norm. Now, you have to contrast that and say, well, why is there so much silence of the institutions? And that's because of fear of reprisals, whether it be fear of being kicked out by your colleagues or fear of actually being directly suggesting that you yourself are racist or that you're calling for the destruction or the genocide of Palestinians. All these kind of typical buzzwords are thrown at the leadership of the university, which causes the leadership to remain silent. But silence isn't the way that this ends, because as we saw in Westfield shopping center, pro-Palestinian mobs hung a Palestinian flag chanting support for Palestinian Action. Now, don't forget, Palestinian Action is a prescribed terrorist organization in the United Kingdom. So this is effectively a crime. But as you can see, it was done in full observance of the police. No actual decisive action was taken. All this in front of families, children, and shoppers. Now, you can imagine the atmosphere of intimidation that it would have been for these families, typically just trying to do a normal shop. And this ultimately is actually the aim of the game. Don't think that it's meant to be otherwise. Now, where we can actually see the leadership in the United Kingdom just dissolving before our very eyes is in the very scandal which threatens to topple Keir Starmer. Now, if Keir Starmer was actually a normal politician in the British tradition, but now he would have actually resigned, but he's not. He's a mini dictator. Now, a terrorist, a British Egyptian activist, now arrives in the United Kingdom, having spent years in Egyptian prisons. Now, he publicly posted calls for death to Zionists and violence against Israelis. And Keir Starmer called his release a top priority for my government, and he says that he is delighted at his arrival. Now, you can watch a summary of what's occurred right here.
The Prime Minister shamefully said that he'd made the repatriation, as it were, or the bringing in of this guy to Britain, a top priority for his government, top, higher than, cutting our taxes, getting the economy working, higher than the NHS, higher than law enforcement, higher than, securing our borders against illegal migrants and bringing the overall number of immigration down. The top priority was to bring a jihadi into Britain. That's what it amounts to from this Prime Minister. Shame on him and shame on his government. It's absolutely outrageous. And yet we've seen time and time again, since October the 7th, ordinary Israeli people, even people who have survived October the 7th, who've tried to get into Britain to do talks about what they went through and so on, have been barred and arrested by border police at airports and only released.
And Israeli politicians, let's not forget. Israeli politicians have also faced a very similar fate.
Exactly. We've got far more aggression towards the only democracy in the Middle East than we do to the jihadis who are trying to kill them and who, given a chance, will try to kill us as well. In fact, they've already tried it and done it in Manchester and on other occasions. Our priorities are completely upside down. We've got a very clear ally in the Middle East, as you've said, Israel, the only democracy, a flawed democracy, but all democracies are flawed, the only democracy in the region that upholds our values. In fact, I would say Israel upholds the old British values, that knows who they are and knows what they want to fight for and how to defend themselves more than we do. Yes, I mean, let's be clear. Israel is fighting our enemies for us. It could not be clearer than that. Time and time again. In fact, just a few weeks ago, Mossad gave a tip-off to various European countries, including Britain, about Hamas cells over the continent who are planning mass atrocity attacks. That was foiled. Israel's fighting our enemies. They want to kill us as well as killing Jews and Israelis in Israel. It could not be clearer or more obvious. This guy, he said, he's a great example. He said he hates white people, wants to kill Israelis, and wants to join Osama bin Laden, who masterminded the 9/11 attacks, which killed 3,000 Americans. I mean, it could not be clearer. Israel's fighting our enemies for us. And what do? We try to subvert and smear and bring down Israel in its attempts to defend us. It couldn't be more topsy-turvy. That's just indicative of the blind alley down which our culture is going, and our Prime Minister is leading the charge.
Now, in typical fashion, you may look at it and say, well, why was it a top priority for his government? So, well, that's actually very easy to understand, and that is because the illiberal establishment in the United Kingdom, full of liberal elites with a brain cell of a turnip, well, these individuals lobbied the government. In fact, you can watch many of these soy boys right here.
Prime Minister Starmer.
Dear Prime Minister Starmer.
Dear Prime Minister Starmer.
Dear Prime Minister Starmer.
Prime Minister, I'm making this video because I, like a lot of people, and I should imagine yourself included, are deeply concerned.
Dear Prime Minister, I'm reaching out to you today because I'm extremely worried.
I am one of many thousands in Britain and all around the world who are deeply concerned about the fate of the writer Alaa Abdel Fattah.
The brilliant, courageous and inspiring writer who has been unjustly imprisoned in Egypt for far, far too many years.
In the words of Foreign Secretary David Lammy, Alaa is a courageous voice of democracy and a prisoner of conscience.
Having exhausted all other possibilities, his mother, Layla, is now deep into a hunger strike.
She's putting her own life in danger so that her son might finally be able to see his own boy again and live a free life once more in peace and dignity.
Prime Minister, the situation is critical. It's time for urgent action.
Given the fact that the deadline is fast approaching in terms of his mother's life, as well as his own safety.
We need a powerful intervention from you as his Prime Minister, and indeed mine.
End the family's suffering, save the life of Dr. Soif, and bring Alaa home to his family, his son in Brighton.
It's time to make the call, Prime Minister.
The world is watching.
Let's free Alaa.
Let's free Alaa.
We're counting on you. Thank you. Free Alaa.
So because of soy boy calls like this, well, Keir Starmer's government lobbied to get this individual released. And would you know, he got released and he was granted emergency citizenship to the United Kingdom to allow him to be extradited to the UK. Now, upon his arrival, Keir Starmer made a huge big stink about it. Aren't I great? Look, I got this terrorist to come to the UK. And immediately, this guy's social media posts blew up all over the internet. Such bangers as, police are not humans, they don't have rights, we should just kill them all. Other bangers like, fuck that, sounds like you need more fear, random shooting of white males should convince them racism costs lives. I can see how this goes. You see, you thought this was all about like the Jews, right? And that it would just be anti-Jew hatred. Well, no, it's not. Because as I keep saying, the Jewish question is just the prelude to what occurs to the normal public, such as this banger. So the brilliant British dogs and monkeys really think terrorists will reveal their plans on Twitter. And I'll switch to something else, advocating killing police, hating white people, assassination plot against something, and so forth it goes, because this is what you're seeing. This isn't an individual who's like, yeah, I'm embracing British values. This is an individual who wants to kill everybody who isn't an Islamist. Now, in response, the Jewish Leadership Council criticized Starmer, who promised to root out anti-Semitism, yet celebrated the arrival of someone who advocates for killing Jews. Well, to be honest, he doesn't just advocate for killing Jews, he advocates for killing all of us. In any case, British Jews are demanding an answer, and trust in government collapses even further, because what we are seeing in the British state is that no one trusts them, because Starmer is a cuckold. In any case, the government claims that Starmer was not aware of this individual's posts, despite the posts being like everywhere, and despite the Egyptians saying like, this is a terrorist, you sure you want him? And this raises two equally disturbing possibilities. Well, either the first is that Keir Starmer deliberately denied what was occurring, or was purely naive, and that in itself is a problem, because if you have a guy leading the state with the power of the state, and he doesn't really know what's going on, he's not fit for government. So neither of these are actually acceptable at his level of leadership, which is exactly why he should go. The guy is not good for the state. Now, the political backlash is, well, predictable, because Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, gave a furious response, calling for the citizenship of this terrorist to be revoked.
Well, good evening, Alex. I was absolutely livid when I heard that this vile piece of work is going to be coming to our country, potentially living at taxpayers' expense for years to come. As you say, a little look at his Twitter account reveals everything you need to know about this man. He says he hates white people. He says that the Brits are monkeys. He says that Zionists deserve to die. He says that the police are not human beings and should be killed. He said during the London riots that the city and Downing Street should be set on fire. He's denied the Holocaust. On and on and on it goes. And yet we saw last night the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary of our country rejoicing at the fact this man was coming here, bragging that they'd achieved some kind of diplomatic coup, that someone who basically hates Britain, hates everything that we stand for, is now going to be coming here to roam our streets and live potentially the rest of his life amongst us. It is an absolute disgrace. It tells you everything you need to know about this Labour government, and it has to be stopped if we can. I think this man's citizenship should be revoked, and he should be made to live in Egypt or, frankly, anywhere else in the world other than the UK.
Nigel Farage reported the terrorist to the counter-terror police, citing posts calling for suicide bombings on Britain, and demanded detention and deportation of the individual who had just been granted citizenship by the Prime Minister, no less. Now, the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, called for the citizenship of this individual to be stripped and demanded deportation of the individual. In fact, Labour's own MPs are turning on Starmer, with ministers openly criticising his leadership, with one Labour minister saying, "We welcomed a racist anti-Semite with open arms." Factually true. Now, all this at a time when a former MI6 informant, Mr. Dean, issued grave warnings suggesting that hundreds of Al-Qaeda sleeper cells were active in the UK, and that another 9/11 style attack was not a if, but rather a when. According to this MI6 informant, Iranian influence and Islamist extremism are the real threats in the UK. Well, that's not true, because Netflix tells me it's actually white males. Yes, white males in their own country are the real threat. In any case, the government appears distracted, ideologically blind, and unprepared. Well, I don't actually think that's entirely true. I think they're very much ideologically aligned, not blind, because they see the Muslim vote as being, well, their new replacement voter bloc. The individuals who vote for Labour are, well, typically from Muslim communities. Now, all this at a time when the Daily Mail ran a full-page coverage of the event, and British Jews are all demanding accountability, with public confidence rapidly eroding in Starmer. Well, I say rapidly eroding, it was already eroded from all the protests that we can see and the way that he's cracking down on free speech. And to be honest, with a record like him, I can see why he doesn't want individuals to repeat exactly what he's doing, because the guy seems absolutely oblivious to his own government. Now, all this creates a perception that the state protects extremism, and it's not really a perception anymore, because it is. And the consequences of that are typical for all to see. We can see the normalization of anti-Semitism, and we can see the paralysis of the police, with the police now more interested in policing anything that might upset the Muslim minority, which will soon be a majority. And this can only really be described as a managed decline of Britain. This isn't multiculturalism anymore. It's Britain walking straight into the pits of hell. So I yet again say, why any moron would want to move to that state, I really don't know. But that's just my opinions. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And until next time, bye.